Panzishinga, Panzine, Sura, Yonji Lighter, and the planet. Piatanaria, Bushode. Blue Bushod Lanoso. The Goshinga, Panzino, Lupi Lare. Come on, look at you, Panzine, Solushi. The Goshinga, a Genadia, see the la, Pinya, see the lachia. A Genadia, she measuring. The Rawari comes out over Panzambia. No, the Rawari comes up with Panzambia. The Rawari go Tankate, so Malao, Genadiashi. Maybe Panzentare, the Rawari, Bioshin Chami, Denide Panzambibo. So I do Panzena Mahoda, go aim up Chilare, go down the midi, Boma. Mibari had two neither made a tanager. Beda, the me of Sissy. Alo, do you dare abuse to be good and good me, Chiwasi in a sanashit? Era no way of negotiating a panelite, that midi to pure. Hey, that midi, Emma. Lema read that midi, Shima, might at that midi, Shima. Pay that me, Pepsi. Chinna put a cool in it. Gonza on. Tu Panzemaro. The Magone say board that we will count a say ball on Panzen light up. No, but not at that we will allow on Panzen light. Pinya Madade that we will Pinya down on Panzen light bubble. Panzen 9 years so maro, come Panzen. Erelo Mohobene Panzen I had done it. Lugin to Bali had done it. The Chojaro, Yoso, Chitani Panzen light day. Africa died that is a major on Panzentar, no? Uroba Lurido, Kara, Punisa GDP on Panzenite. But Mari Jaro, Chojolo, Mount Lala Baba on Panzenite. Aido, tu Panzena, but Maria Ginagon Gina Leve, Africa, Gina Chimachina, no? Do it cheat, Abba. Do it cheat. Gina Mammo. Anyway, Chanda do they got. Chinama said, say, Gina Naimu. Tururo, Chana on Panzene, Arojaro, Chana on Panzemu, so be. Pitima. Ereluri, Pilla, 9 A Pilla 9 Dredja. Panzation, Sura, Luranga, Lekan, Mam, Honam. Luranga, Gino Jama, Mahofu. Dodo purely me. Luri Magano, Dilupia, Ludo. A pig I told you. Ero, Magani go on my Panzen people, Panzen night now, eh? The Goshi de solution, Magana Lu, go on look bila. Say to that Lu, say she on Panzen Billa. Doda G. Lu, Doda Maji on Panzen Billa. Allo let low night one share than it, but look a bit, eh? Major shit like that, no? Eram yes of Yaga. Pago weaver top yap be the little solution. Pansin shing up, Pansin de look, Pansin look, Pierre de look so it. A dwee call a dee mingo. Let can't have a book de out for it. Go go in load in a case, load in a case, switch a way, take them shit over. Pablo Rosoin. Pierre again, Lord Roger by Pierre Mave. Go a go you ched was a malo. However, we do Roger time, do Pazena. Garania, sir, load in a case on him, load in a case. Sura, Luria, go a go you ched nature, David Mishu. You ched them, Luro. Lucana, so though we know. Sana alias or Juba Atomu, so though we know. A chain down losing, Panzation, and the two seamen Kaya Mavipset. Erajamulu, Louis Lola Wiria, Dipia, Sandaru, Domo and Nora, Pset 190. Send a live solution. Luria, for what yada de Kama. A young one at the Muire Bugushide, no. The Rawari then the Muire Bogushide. Magone do say I didn't the Muire Bogurishide, Swing we young chabi, the Muire Bogurishide. အဲ့ဒါဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ရွှေဆိုင်ဖွင့်ပြီးတော့ရွှေရောင်းရတာလေဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့လားတခိုးဓမြဖြစ်ပြီးတော့သူများပစ္စည်းကိုလူယူတိုက်ခို့ကိုကြိုးစားတာလေဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့လားအဲ့တော့ဖန်ဆင်းပြီးရင်ထောင်ထဲကြတော့လည်းပဲဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့ထောင်ချတယ်တရားသူကြီးကချတာမဟုတ်ဘူးအဲ့ဒါဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တရားသူကြီးကထောင်ချတာမဟုတ်ဘူးအပြစ်ကထောင်ချတာမဟုတ်ဘူးဘုရားသခင်ကထောင်ချတယ်ဆိုရပြောเสียအပြစ်အနာစာတွေအများကြီးဖြစ်လာစဉ်းစားเสียတွေအများကြီးဖြစ်လာအဲ့ဒါမြတ်စွာဘုရားစဉ်းစားပြဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့သူ့တဲ့တန်နေရတယ်ဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့သူများဥစ္စာခိုးနေရတယ်ဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့ဂျာကူရီဘဝရောက်နေတယ်ဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့လူလိမ်လူခေါင်းဖြစ်နေရတယ်ဘုရားသခင်ဖန်ဆင်းလို့မူရစ်စေဝါတွေသုံးနေရတယ်ဆိုတဲ့အဓိပ္ပာယ်မျိုးတွေဖြစ်ကုန်ရောအဲ့ဒါလို့မစီလျော်တဲ့အခြေအနေမျိုးတွေဖြစ်ပေါ်လာစေတယ်ဒါကြောင့်မြတ်စွာဘုရားကအဲ့ဒါဟာမှန်ကန်မှုမရှိဘူးတကယ်ကတော့လူဘဝရလာတယ်ဆိုတာဟာဘယ်သူမပြုမိမိမှုမိမိကိုယ်တိုင်လုပ်ခဲ့တဲ့အတိုင်းလူတွေဟာကိုလှုပ်တာကိုရကြတာလားဖြစ်တယ်ကိုလှုပ်တာကိုရတယ်ဆိုဟုတ်တယ်ကိုအသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းမုံဖုတ်ပြီးအသက်မွေးမယ်ရွှေရောင်းချပြီးအသက်မွေးမယ်စတိုးဆိုင်ဖွင့်ပြီးအသက်မွေးမယ်တကူကိုလှုပ်နဲ့ကိုလှုပ်နေကြတာပဲလေကိုဝါသနာပါရလှုပ်ကြတာပြီးတော့အလုတ်မကောင်းမှုဆိုလည်းပြောင်းလို့ရလေဖန်ဆင်းထိုင်ပြောင်းလို့မရတော့ဘူးဖန်ဆင်းကြတယ်ဒီတိုင်းဖန်ဆင်းလိုက်တာဆိုပြောင်းမရအခုကပြောင်းရကိုဒီအလုတ်မကြိုက်ဘူးဆိုနောက်တစ်လုတ်ပြောင်းရတချို့ဆိုဆရာဝန်တင်တန်းတက်ပြီးတော့ဘွဲတွေပါတွေရပြီးတော့ဆရာဝန်လုံးမစားခြင်းလို့တခါဈေးရောင်းစားတာတွေလည်းပြည့်အဲ့တော့ဘုရားသခင်ကလွယ်လွယ်မမဖန်ဆင်းလိုက်သလားမသိဘူးအဲ့ဒါကြတော့နော်မင်းဆရာဝန်ဆေးကြောင်းတော့တက်ဒါပေမဲ့မင်းဆရာဝန်မလုံးနဲ့လို့များဖန်ဆင်းလိုက်သလားအဲ့ဒီလိုတွေစဉ်းစားစရာတွေဖြစ်ကုန်တယ်နော်တကယ်ကတော့လူတွေဟာကိုယ်ဆုံးဖြတ်ချက်နဲ့ကိုယ်လုံးနေကြတာဆိုတာထင်ရှားတယ်ကိုယ်ဆုံးဖြတ်ချက်နဲ့အဲ့တော့မြတ်စွာဘုရားကကမ္မတက္ကတတမ္မာဒိဋ္ဌိလူဘဝရလာတယ်ဆိုတာတဲ့ကိုလုံးထားအောင်မို့ဆိုလေးရှိတယ် we are our own architect ကိုဘဝကိုပဲဖန်ဆင်းလာအဲ့ဒီအယူဆအမြင်ကိုဘုန်းကြီးတို့တော့အလွန်ကျေနပ်တယ်ဘာဖြစ်လို့တော့ဆိုကောင်းလဲကိုမှတောင်းရှိတယ်မကောင်းလဲကိုပဲတောင်းရှိတယ်အလွန်ကိုလွတ်လပ်တယ်အလွန်ကိုလွတ်လပ်တယ်ကိုဘာဖြစ်ချင်တယ်လဲဖြစ်အောင်လုပ်ကိုဘာကြိုက်တယ်လဲကြိုက်တာလုပ်လို့ရလူတွေကမသိခင်လည်းပဲဒီလိုပဲရွေးကြတာပဲလေရွေးကြတာကိုကြိုက်တဲ့ပညာသင်တယ်ကိုလှုပ်ချင်တဲ့လုပ်ငန်းလုပ်ကြတယ်လုပ်ကြတာကိုယ့်ကိုရွေးချယ်မှုနဲ့သွားကြတာပဲဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့အဲ့တော့ဘဝမှာလည်းပဲကိုယ့်ကိုရွေးချယ်လို့ရတယ်မြတ်စွာဘုရားကအကြောင်းနဲ့အကျိုးဟောထားတာဖြစ်လို့ဒါနကောင်းမှုလုပ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေဟာဟိုဘဝကျတော့ချမ်းသာကြွယ်ဝမယ်သီလကောင်းမှုလုပ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေဟာကျမ်းမာမယ်သက်ရှိမယ်နော်ဒါနသီလပြည့်စုံတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေကလူဘဝလူချမ်းသာကိုရတယ်လွန်လွန်ကဲကဲဒါနသီလကိုလုပ်ပြီးဆိုရင်နတ်ဘဝကိုရောက်တယ်နတ်ပြည်ရောက်ပြီးတော့ချမ်းသာမယ်သမထကျင့်စဉ်တစ်ခုကိုအောင်မြင်မြင်ကျင့်မယ်ဆိုရင်ဗြဟ္မဘုံရောက်တယ်ကဘာကြာအောင်ကဘာပေါင်းများစွာကြာအောင်အသက်ရှိတယ်ဝိပဿနာကျင့်စဉ်ကိုကျင့်လိုက်လို့ရှိရင်တဏှာဝကလွတ်မြောက်တယ်ဆိုတာသူကျင့်စဉ်နဲ့သူအကြောင်းနဲ့သူဟာသူဒီလိုဟောတာဘယ်သူမှဖန်ဆင်းတာမဟုတ်အဲ့ဒီလိုလွတ်လပ်တယ်ကိုကြိုက်တာကိုလုံးလို့ရဖျားဖြစ်ပြီးတော့တရားတွေကိုကဲ့တင်ရင်လည်းပဲဖျားစုပန်ပြီးပါရမီဖြစ်တယ်နော်အေးဖျားမဖြစ်ဖျားဖြစ်ရမှာပါရမီဖြစ်ရမှာကြောက်တယ်အဲ့ကတာဝကလောက်ဆိုတော်ပါပြီဆိုရင်လေပါရမီဖြစ်ဖျားမဖြစ်ချင်ဘူးဖျားအဖေအမေဖြစ်ချင်တယ်ဆိုတော့ပါရမီဖြစ်လို့ရအဲ့ဒါလို့ပေါ့အမျိုးစုံကိုကြိုက်တာကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးချယ်ခွင့်ရှိကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးချယ်ကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးချယ်ခွင့်ရှိတာဘယ်လောက်ရှိနေစမ်း အခုခေတ်မှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကိုယ့်အကိုမရွေးချက်ခွင့်မရှိတာတွေဟာရှိသေးတယ်ကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးချက်ခွင့်မရှိဘူးဆေးချောင်းတက်ချင်တဲ့အမှတ်က300လောက်400လောက်ဖြစ်တယ်ရွေးလို့မရဗျာနော်အင်ဂျင်နီယာဝင်နေတဲ့အမှတ်နဲ့နေရွေးလို့မရဗျာကိုကြိုက်တာတောင်မှပဲလူဘဝဟာရွေးလို့မရတာအများကြီးရှိတယ်အဲ့တော့ဒီကံတရားနဲ့ပတ်သက်လာလို့ရှိရင်ကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးလို့ရလုံးဝဆောင်ဝဲအမှတ်နဲ့ချိတ်ဆက်ထားတာမရှိဘူးနော်ကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးကိုကြိုက်တာကိုရွေးပြီးတော့အလုပ်ပဲလုပ်ဖို့လိုတယ်ပညာတတ်ကြီးဖြစ်ခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ပညာပါရမီဖြစ်ပညာပါရမီဖြစ်ရသင်ကြားရမယ်ပညာတကယ်ကိုတကူရှင်ကြီးဖြစ်ခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုတကူရခြင်းအကြောင်းတရားတွေကိုလို့သူတို့ဆိုလိုတာပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့ကိုကိုချောမောလှပခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ပြုံးပြုံးလေးနေစိတ်မဆိုးနဲ့စိတ်ဆိုးရင်လူဟာစိတ်ဆိုးရင်အယုတ်ဆိုးကြည့်တတ်တယ်လေဒေါသထွက်လာလို့ရှိရင်လူဟာနှုတ်ခမ်းညက်ဆူတာချောတဲ့လူတောင်မှပဲစိတ်ဆိုးရင်အလှပြက်သွားတာပဲဒါသဘာဝနော်ခဏခဏစိတ်တူလို့ရှိရင်အဲ့ဒီပုံစံကြီးဖြစ်လာတာဒါကြောင့်မို့ထံပြင်းဒေါသကြည်လွန်ကအလှပြက်ပြီဆိုစိတ်တူတဲ့လူဟာဖြစ်လျက်ဘဝမှာမျက်နှာကြီးကထဏ္ဏကြီးနဲ့ဟုတ်လားမျက်နှာပုတ်ကြီးနဲ့ဖြစ်တတ်တယ်တဲ့အဲ့ဒါအစရေကဒေါသမရှိဘူးအလုံးကပြုံးပြုံးရွှင်ရွှင်ခင်ခင်မင်မင်နေတတ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တယောက်ဟာအဲ့ဒီကြည်လင်တဲ့မျက်နှာနဲ့ပဲဘဝမှာဖြစ်တယ်ဟောသူလုပ်ခဲ့တဲ့အတိုင်းသူဖြစ်တာလေအသားဖြူခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တချို့ကအသားဖြူခြင်းတို့လည်းဖျောင်းနိုင်လှူတယ်အဲ့ဒါတော့သိမစီဆိုင်ဘူးတမန်တော့အသားဖြူခြင်းတို့ဖျောင်းနိုင်လှူတာတဲ့တချို့တက္ကမကြီးတွေကြမ်းကြမ်းဖန်ဖန်အဲ့လိုလုပ်တယ်ဖျောင်းနိုင်လှူတာတောင်ရိုးရိုးမလှူအသားဖြူခြင်းတို့ထုံးလှူပါလားဆိုထုံးတော့မလှူအဲ့ဒါဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မိသွေးလှူလို့ရှိရင်အသားမဲမယ်ဆိုပုံစံဖြစ်အဲ့ဒါလို့လည်းမဟုတ်နိုင်ဘူးနော်အတုံးကတခြားစီဘူးတုံးကတခြားဆိုလိုရင်းကအသားဖြူတာဟာချောမောလှပခြင်းနဲ့မှပါတယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မေတ္တာရှိတဲ့မျက်နှာရှင်ဟာချောမောလှပမှာဒေါသကြီးတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဟာဖြစ်လျက်ဘဝမှာဒီရုပ်ဆိုးချစ်တန်ဒီဘဝမှာဒါနကောင်းမှုလုပ်လို့ရှိရင်နောက်မှချမ်းသာကြွယ်ဝလို့ဖြစ်တယ်မလူရဲ့မတန်းရဲ့နှမျောဖက်နေတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဒီနောက်ဘဝကျစားရမယ်မဲ့တောင်းရမယ်ဖြစ်တယ်ဒီဘဝပညာမသိတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ကနောက်ဘဝလည်းပညာတတ်ဖို့ခက်ခဲတယ်ပညာသိတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ကနောက်ဘဝပညာတတ်နိုင်တယ်သူများအသက်မတတ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဒီနောက်ဘဝအသက်ရှိသူများအသက်တွေတတ်ပြီးတော့အသက်ရှိပါစေဆုတောင်းလို့လည်းမရဘူးအသက်တူတတ်တယ်သူများကိုနှိပ်စက်ညှဉ်းပန်းတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဒီတစ်ဖက်သားခံရတယ်လို့သူလည်းယောဂဝေဒနာတွေဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ဖြစ်တယ်မူရစေဝါရှောင်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဟာနောက်ဘဝမှာအယူအနံ့မဖြစ်ဘူးမူရစေဝါသုံးဆွဲလို့ရှိရင်မူးတယ်ဆိုတာမူးတယ်ဆိုတဲ့အယူဖြစ်တာပဲလေအဲ့ဒီမူရစေဝါသုံးပြီဆိုရင်နောက်ဘဝမှာအယူအနံ့သွားဖြစ်တယ်တော့အဲ့ဒါလို့သူ့အကြောင်းနဲ့သူ့အကျိုးကြည့်လိုက်တဲ့အခါကျတော့ကိုကောင်းစားခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုရင်ကိုကောင်းတဲ့အလုပ်ပဲလုပ်ဖို့လိုတယ်အဲ့ဒါအလွန်ကိုလွတ်လပ်လို့အလွန်ကျင့်တတ်တယ်ဘုန်းကြီးတို့လွန်ကျင့်တတ်တယ်အဲ့လိုမဟုတ်ဘဲနဲ့တဏ္ဍာရဘုရားသခင်ကဘယ်တော့မှမလဲဆိုတဲ့ညနာလေးမော့ပြီးမျောနေရမယ်ဘဝဟာအလွန်ဆိုးတဲ့ဘဝပဲနော်သူစိတ်ပါမှာဖန်ဆဲမှာစိတ်မပိုင်ပြစ်ထားလဲကိုခံရမှာဘာလုပ်လို့မရဘူးဟုတ်အဲ့လိုမဟုတ်ဘူးမြတ်စွာဘုရားကြတော့အဲ့တော့ကိုလှုပ်တာကိုရတယ်ဆိုကိုယ့်ကိုကြိုးစားလို့ရှိရင်ကိုကြိုးစားတဲ့အတိုင်းဖြစ်လာဝိရိယရဲ့အကျိုးရှိလာဒါမှမဟုတ်ဗမာစကားမှာလဲကြိုးစားကဘုရားတောင်ဖြစ်တယ်ဆိုတာရှိတယ်ပေါ့အဲ့ဒါဟာကျင့်တတ်ဖွယ်အကောင်းဆုံးအဲ့ဒါကမ္မတက္ကတာသမာဓိဋ္ဌိဆိုတဲ့ကံကံဤအကျိုးပေါ်မှာမိခိုးရှုမြင်တတ်တဲ့အသိဉာဏ်ဟာဘလောက်ထိအောင်လူတွေရဲ့ဘဝကိုအထက်တန်းကိုရောက်သွားစေနိုင်တယ်ဆိုတာစဉ်းစားကြည့်ပေါ့ ဒါမို့မြတ်စွာဘုရားကံကံဤကျိုးကိုယုံကြည်လက်ခံခြင်းသိမြင်ခြင်းဆိုတဲ့ကာမတက္ကတာသမ္မာဒိဋ္ဌိဟာမှန်ကန်တဲ့အမြင်တစ်ခုဖြစ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီမှန်ကန်တဲ့အမြင်ကိုခြေခံပြီးဒါနကောင်းမှုသီလကောင်းမှုလုပ်ခြင်းအပြင်လူတွေဟာချမ်းသာဒုက္ခရကြတယ်ဆိုတာကိုအတိအကျဟောထားတာဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့
Chapter 1. He, although he died, yet speaks. Paragraph 1. Question. What prevented the family of Adam and Eve from entering the Garden of Eden? And what did Abel want more than anything else? Abel looked at his flock of sheep grazing peacefully on the hillside. Then, perhaps he looked far beyond his sheep to a spot in the distance where he could just make out a faint glow. He knew that right there a flaming blade was turning, ever turning, blocking the way into the Garden of Eden. His parents once lived there, but neither they nor their children could enter now. Imagine the late afternoon breeze ruffling Abel's hair as he turned his gaze upward and thought about his Creator. Would the breach between man and God ever be healed? Abel wanted nothing more than that. Paragraphs 2 through 4. Question. In what sense does Abel speak to us today? Abel speaks to you today. Can you hear him? You might say that such a thing is impossible. After all, this second son of Adam died a long time ago. His remains are long lost, mingled with the dust of nearly 60 centuries. Regarding the dead, the Bible teaches us they are conscious of nothing at all. Ecclesiastes 9, 5 and 10. Further, Abel never uttered a single word that is recorded in the Bible. So how can he speak to us? The Apostle Paul was inspired to say this about Abel. Through it, he, although he died, yet speaks.
Hebrews 11:4 reads, By faith Abel offered God a sacrifice of greater worth than Cain, through which faith he had witness borne to him that he was righteous, God bearing witness respecting his gifts. And through it he, although he died, yet speaks.
Through what does Abel speak? Through faith. Abel was the first human ever to develop that sterling quality. So powerfully did he demonstrate faith that his example is alive, a vibrant standard that we can apply today. If we learn from his faith and seek to imitate it, then the record of Abel is speaking to us in a very real and effective way. What, though, can we learn of Abel and his faith when so little is said about him in the Bible? Let us see. Growing up in the time of the founding of the world. Paragraph 5. Question. What is the meaning of Jesus' statement associating Abel with the founding of the world? Abel was born near the dawn of human history. Jesus later associated Abel with the founding of the world.
Luke 11:50-51 reads, So that the blood of all the prophets spilled from the founding of the world may be required from this generation, from the blood of Abel down to the blood of Zechariah, who was slain between the altar and the house. Yes, I tell you, it will be required from this generation.
Jesus evidently meant the world of people who might be redeemed from sin. While Abel was the fourth human to exist, it seems that he was the first one whom God saw as redeemable. The footnote reads, The expression, the founding of the world, involves the idea of casting down seed, suggesting procreation, so it has to do with the earliest human offspring. Why, though, did Jesus connect Abel with the founding of the world and not Cain, who was the first such offspring? Cain's decisions and actions amounted to a willful rebellion against Jehovah God. Like his parents, Cain does not appear to be in line for resurrection and redemption. End of footnote. Clearly, Abel did not grow up among the best of influences. Paragraph 6, question: What kind of parents did Abel have? Though the world was young, a pall of sadness hung over the human family. Abel's parents, Adam and Eve, were likely beautiful, dynamic people, but they had fallen far in life, and they knew it. They were once perfect, with the prospect of eternal life before them. Then they rebelled against Jehovah God and were banished from their paradise home in the Garden of Eden. By putting their own desires ahead of all else, even the needs of their offspring, they lost perfection and eternal life. Paragraphs 7 and 8, question: What did Eve say when Cain was born, and what may she have had in mind? Exiled to life outside the garden, Adam and Eve found their existence hard. Yet when their first child was born, they named him Cain, or something produced, and Eve proclaimed, "I have produced a man with the aid of Jehovah." Genesis 4:1. Her words suggest that she may have had in mind the promise Jehovah made in the garden, foretelling that a certain woman would produce a seed or offspring who would one day destroy the wicked one who had led Adam and Eve astray. Did Eve imagine that she was the woman in the prophecy, and that Cain was the promised seed? If so, she was sadly mistaken. What is more, if she and Adam fed Cain such ideas as he grew up, they surely did his imperfect human pride no good. In time, Eve bore a second son, but we find no such high-flown statements about him. They named him Abel, which may mean exhalation or vanity. Did that choice of a name reflect lower expectations, as if they put less hope in Abel than in Cain? We can only guess. Paragraph 9, question: What can parents today learn from our first parents? Parents today can learn much from those first parents. By your words and actions, will you feed your children's pride, ambition, and selfish tendencies? Or will you teach them to love Jehovah God and to seek friendship with Him? Sadly, the first parents failed in their responsibility. Yet, there was hope for their offspring. Abel developed faith. How? Paragraphs 10 and 11, question: Cain and Abel took up what kinds of work, and what quality did Abel develop? As the two boys grew up, Adam likely trained them in work that was necessary to provide for the family. Cain took up farming. Abel took up shepherding. However, Abel did something far more important. Over the years, he developed faith, that beautiful quality of which Paul later wrote. Think of it. Abel had no human example to whom he could look. How then did he develop faith in Jehovah God? Consider three solid bases on which his faith likely rested. Paragraphs 12 and 13, question: How might observing Jehovah's creation have helped Abel to grow in faith? Jehovah's creation. True, Jehovah had placed a curse on the ground, causing it to produce thorns and thistles that impeded agriculture. Still, the earth generously produced the food that kept Abel's family alive, and there was no curse on the animals, including birds and fish, nor on the mountains, lakes, rivers, and seas, nor on the skies, clouds, sun, moon, and stars. Everywhere Abel looked, he saw evidence of the profound love, wisdom, and goodness of Jehovah God, the one who created all things.
Romans 1:20 reads, "For his invisible qualities are clearly seen from the world's creation onward, because they are perceived by the things made, even his eternal power and godship, so that they are inexcusable."
No doubt, meditating appreciatively on such things strengthened Abel's faith. Abel surely took time to ponder spiritual matters. Picture him tending his flock. A shepherd's life required a great deal of walking. He led the gentle creatures over hills, through valleys, across rivers, ever seeking the greenest grass, the best watering holes, the most sheltered resting places. Of all of God's creatures, sheep seemed the most helpless, as if they were designed to need man to guide and protect them. Did Abel see that he too needed guidance, protection, and care from someone far wiser and more powerful than any human? No doubt he expressed many such thoughts in prayer, and his faith continued to grow as a result. Paragraphs 14 and 15. Question: Jehovah's promises gave Abel what food for meditation? Jehovah's promises. Adam and Eve must have related to their sons the events in the Garden of Eden that led to their expulsion. Thus, Abel had much food for meditation. Jehovah said that the ground would be cursed. Abel could clearly see the thorns and thistles that fulfilled those words. Jehovah also foretold that Eve would suffer pain in pregnancy and childbirth. As Abel's siblings were born, he no doubt learned that those words came true as well. Jehovah foresaw that Eve would feel an unbalanced need for her husband's love and attention, and that Adam would in turn dominate her. Abel watched that sad reality playing out before his eyes. In every case, Abel saw that Jehovah's word is completely reliable. Thus, Abel had solid reasons for putting faith in God's promise about a seed or offspring who would one day right the wrongs that had begun in Eden. Paragraphs 16 and 17. Question: What might Abel have learned from Jehovah's cherubs? Jehovah's servants. Abel did not find any good examples in the human family, but humans were not the only intelligent creatures on the earth at that time. When Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, Jehovah made sure that neither they nor their offspring would gain access to that earthly paradise. To guard the entrance, Jehovah posted cherubs, very high-ranking angels, along with the flaming blade of a sword that turned continually.
Genesis 3:24 reads, "And so he drove the man out, and posted at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubs and the flaming blade of a sword that was turning itself continually to guard the way to the tree of life."
Imagine what it was like for Abel to see those cherubs when he was a boy. In their materialized form, their appearance surely bespoke immense power. And that sword, ever aflame, ever turning, inspired awe as well. As Abel grew up, did he ever find that those cherubs got bored and left their post? No. Day and night, year after year, decade after decade, those intelligent, powerful creatures stayed right in that spot. Abel thus learned that Jehovah God had righteous, steadfast servants. In those cherubs, Abel could see a kind of loyalty and obedience to Jehovah that he could not find in his own family. That angelic example no doubt strengthened his faith. Paragraph 18. Question: What ample basis do we have for building faith today? Meditating on all that Jehovah revealed about himself through creation, divine promises, and the examples of his angelic servants, Abel found that his faith grew ever stronger. His example speaks to us, does it not? Young people in particular may find it reassuring to know that they can develop genuine faith in Jehovah God no matter what their family members do. With the wonders of creation all around us and the entire Bible at our disposal, as well as many human examples of faith, we have ample basis for building faith today. Abel's sacrifice, why it excelled. Paragraph 19. Question: In time, what profound truth did Abel come to grasp? As Abel's faith in Jehovah grew, he wanted to find a way to express that faith in action. Yet, what could a mere man give to the Creator of the universe? Clearly, God did not need any gift or help from humans. In time, Abel came to grasp a profound truth. If, with the right motive, he simply offered to Jehovah the best of what he had, his loving Father would be pleased. Paragraphs 20 and 21. Question: Cain and Abel each made what offering to Jehovah, and how did he respond? Abel prepared to offer up some sheep from his flock. He selected the best, the firstlings, and what seemed the choicest pieces. Meanwhile, Cain too sought God's blessing and favor, preparing an offering from his crops. But his motives were not like those of Abel. The difference became apparent when the brothers presented their offerings. Both sons of Adam may have used altars and fire for their offerings, perhaps within sight of the cherubs, who were the only living representatives of Jehovah on earth at that time. Jehovah responded. We read, Jehovah was looking with favor upon Abel and his offering. Genesis 4:4. How God made his favor evident, the Bible does not say. Paragraphs 22 and 23. Question: What accounts for the way Jehovah favored Abel's offering? Why did God favor Abel? Was it the offering itself? Abel did offer a living, breathing creature, shedding its precious lifeblood. Did Abel realize how valuable such a sacrifice would be? Many centuries after Abel's time, God used the sacrifice of an unblemished lamb to picture the sacrifice of his own perfect Son, the Lamb of God, whose innocent blood would be shed. John 1:29. However, much of that surely lay well beyond Abel's knowledge or understanding. What we know for certain is this: Abel offered up the very best of what he had. Jehovah looked with favor not only on the offering, but on the man himself. Motivated by love for Jehovah and by genuine faith in him, Abel acted. Paragraph 24. Question A. Why do we say that Cain's offering was not faulty in itself? Question B. In what way was Cain like many to this day? It was different with Cain. Jehovah did not look with any favor upon Cain and upon his offering. Genesis 4:5. It was not that Cain's offering was faulty in itself. God's law later allowed the offering of the produce of the ground. But the Bible says of Cain that his own works were wicked.
1 John 3:12 reads, Not like Cain, who originated with the wicked one and slaughtered his brother. And for the sake of what did he slaughter him? Because his own works were wicked, but those of his brother were righteous.
Like so many to this day, Cain evidently thought that the mere outward show of devotion to God was enough. His lack of real faith in or love for Jehovah quickly became apparent through his actions. Paragraphs 25 and 26. Question: Jehovah gave Cain what warning? Yet what did Cain do? When Cain saw that he had not won Jehovah's favor, did he seek to learn from Abel's example? No. He seethed with hatred for his brother. Jehovah saw what was happening in Cain's heart and patiently tried to reason with him. He warned Cain that his course was leading towards serious sin, and he offered the hope of an exaltation if Cain would only change his ways. Cain ignored God's warning. He invited his trusting younger brother to walk with him in the field. There Cain assaulted Abel and murdered him. In a sense, Abel thus became the first victim of religious persecution, the first martyr. He was dead, but his story was far from finished. Paragraph 27, question A. Why can we be confident that Abel is in line for a resurrection? Question B. How can we be sure to meet Abel one day? Figuratively, Abel's blood cried out to Jehovah God for vengeance or justice, and God saw justice done, punishing wicked Cain for his crime. More important, the record of Abel's faith speaks to us today. His lifespan, perhaps about a century long, was short for humans of that era, but Abel made his years on this earth count. He died knowing that he had the love and approval of his heavenly Father Jehovah. We can be confident, then, that he is safe in Jehovah's limitless memory, awaiting a resurrection to life in an earthly paradise. Will you meet him there? You can, if you are determined to listen as Abel speaks and to imitate his outstanding faith. Questions to think about. How does Abel speak to us today? What can parents learn from the mistakes of Abel's parents? How might Jehovah's creation, his promises, and his cherubs have helped Abel to build faith? In what ways do you intend to imitate Abel's faith? Chapter 2. He walked with the true God. Paragraphs 1 and 2. Question. Noah and his family were involved in what project? And what were some of the challenges they faced? Noah straightened his back and stretched his aching muscles. Picture him seated on a broad wooden beam, taking a moment's rest from his work as he looked out over the immense structure of the ark. The pungent smell of hot tar was in the air. The sounds of woodworking tools reverberated. From where he sat, Noah could see his sons hard at work on various parts of the great network of timbers. His sons, their wives, and his own dear wife had all been laboring with him on this project for decades now. They had come a long way, but they had a long way to go. The people of the region thought of them all as fools. The more the ark took shape, the more the people laughed at the very thought of a deluge that would cover the whole earth. The disaster that Noah kept warning them about seemed so far-fetched, so preposterous. They could hardly believe that a man would waste his life and the lives of his family in such a foolish endeavor. However, Noah's God Jehovah saw the man in a very different light. Paragraph 3. Question. In what sense did Noah walk with God? God's word says, Noah walked with the true God.
Genesis 6:9 reads, This is the history of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He proved himself faultless among his contemporaries. Noah walked with the true God.
What did that mean? Not that God walked on earth, nor that Noah somehow went to heaven. Rather, Noah obeyed his God so closely and loved him so dearly that it was as if he and Jehovah walked together as friends. Thousands of years later, the Bible said of Noah, "Through his faith he condemned the world." Hebrews 11:7. How was that so? What can we today learn from his faith? A faultless man in a twisted world. Paragraphs 4 and 5. Question. In Noah's day, how had the world gone from bad to worse? Noah grew up in a world that was rapidly going from bad to worse. It had been bad in the days of his great-grandfather Enoch, another righteous man who walked with God. Enoch had foretold that a day of judgment was coming upon the ungodly people of the world. Now, in Noah's day, ungodliness was far worse. In fact, from Jehovah's viewpoint, the earth was ruined, for it was filled with violence. What had happened to make things so much worse? A terrible tragedy had unfolded among God's spirit sons, the angels. One of them had already rebelled against Jehovah, becoming Satan the devil by slandering God and luring Adam and Eve into sin. In Noah's day, other angels began to revolt against Jehovah's just rule. Forsaking their God-given station in heaven, they came to earth, assumed human form, and took beautiful women as their wives. Those proud, selfish, rebel angels were a poisonous influence among humans. Paragraph 6, question: what effect did the Nephilim have on the world's spirit? And what did Jehovah determine to do? Further, the unnatural unions between materialized angels and human women produced hybrid sons of extraordinary size and strength. The Bible calls them Nephilim, which literally means fellers, those who cause others to fall. Vicious bullies, the Nephilim intensified the world's brutal, ungodly spirit. Little wonder that in the view of the Creator, the badness of man was abundant in the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only bad all the time. Jehovah determined that he would wipe out that wicked society in 120 years.
Genesis 6, 3-5 reads, After that Jehovah said, My spirit shall not act toward man indefinitely, in that he is also flesh. Accordingly, his days shall amount to 120 years. The Nephilim proved to be in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of the true God continued to have relations with the daughters of men, and they bore sons to them. They were the mighty ones who were of old, the men of fame. Consequently, Jehovah saw that the badness of man was abundant in the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only bad all the time.
Paragraph 7, question: Noah and his wife faced what challenge in protecting their sons from the vile influences of the day? Imagine trying to raise a family in such a world. Yet Noah did so. He found a good wife. After Noah turned 500 years of age, his wife bore him 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The footnote reads, People in those early days lived far longer than we do today. Their longevity evidently had to do with their being closer to the vitality and perfection that Adam and Eve once had but lost. End of footnote. Together, the parents had to protect their boys from the vile influences surrounding them. Little boys tend to be filled with awe and admiration for mighty ones and men of fame, and the Nephilim were just that. Noah and his wife could hardly shield the children from every report about the exploits of those giants, but they could teach the appealing truth about Jehovah God, the one who hates all wickedness. They had to help their boys see that Jehovah felt hurt by the violence and rebellion in the world. Paragraph 8, question: How can wise parents today imitate the example of Noah and his wife? Parents today may well sympathize with Noah and his wife. Our world is likewise poisoned by violence and rebelliousness. Cities are often dominated by gangs of wayward youths. Even entertainment directed at young children may be saturated with violent themes. Wise parents do all they can to counter such influences by teaching their children about the God of peace, Jehovah, who will one day bring all violence to an end. Success is possible. Noah and his wife succeeded. Their boys grew up to be good men, and they married wives who were likewise willing to put the true God Jehovah first in their lives. Make for yourself an ark. Paragraphs 9 and 10. Question A. What command from Jehovah changed Noah's life? Question B. What did Jehovah reveal to Noah about the ark's design and purpose? One day, Noah's life changed forever. Jehovah spoke to this beloved servant and told him of his purpose to bring the world of that time to an end. God commanded Noah, "Make for yourself an ark out of wood of a resinous tree." Genesis 6:14. This ark was not a ship, as some assume. It had neither bow nor stern, keel nor rudder, no curves. It was basically a great chest or box. Jehovah gave Noah the precise dimensions of the ark, some details regarding its design, and directions to coat it inside and out with tar. And he told Noah why. "Here I am bringing the deluge of waters upon the earth. Everything that is in the earth will expire." However, Jehovah made this covenant or formal agreement with Noah. "You must go into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you." Genesis 6:17-20. Noah was also to bring representatives of all kinds of animals. Only those aboard the ark could survive the coming deluge. Paragraphs 11 and 12. Question: Noah faced what gigantic task, and how did he respond to the challenge? Noah faced a gigantic task. This ark was to be enormous, some 437 feet long, 73 feet wide, and 44 feet tall. It was far larger than the largest sea-going wooden ships built even in modern times. Did Noah back off from this assignment, complain about its challenges, or alter the details to make it easier on himself? The Bible answers, Noah proceeded to do according to all that God had commanded him. He did just so. Genesis 6:22. The work took decades, perhaps 40 to 50 years. There were trees to fell, logs to haul, and beams to hew, shape, and join. The ark was to have 3 stories or decks, a number of compartments, and a door in the side. Evidently, there were windows along the top, as well as a roof that likely peaked in the middle with a slight pitch so that water would run off. Paragraph 13. Question: What aspect of Noah's work may have been more challenging than ark building, and how did people respond to it? As the years passed and the ark took shape, Noah must have been so glad to have the support of his family. There was another aspect to the work that might have been even more challenging than ark building. The Bible tells us that Noah was a preacher of righteousness.
2 Peter 2:5 reads, "And he did not hold back from punishing an ancient world, but kept Noah, a preacher of righteousness, safe with 7 others when he brought a deluge upon a world of ungodly people."
So he courageously took the lead in trying to warn the people of that wicked, godless society about the destruction that was heading their way. How did they respond? Jesus Christ later recalled that time, saying that those people took no note. Matthew 24:37-39. He said that they were so caught up in the affairs of daily life, eating, drinking, and marrying, that they paid no heed to Noah. No doubt many ridiculed him and his family. Some may have threatened him and violently opposed him. They may even have tried to sabotage the construction project. Paragraph 14. Question: What can Christian families today learn from Noah and his family? Yet Noah and his family never quit. Even though they lived in a world that was geared toward making their primary pursuit in life seem trivial, misguided, or foolish, they still kept at it faithfully. Christian families today can thus learn a great deal from the faith of Noah and his family. After all, we live in what the Bible calls the last days of this world system of things. 2 Timothy 3:1. Jesus said that our era would be just like the era in which Noah built the ark. If the world reacts to the message about God's kingdom with apathy, ridicule, or even persecution, Christians do well to remember Noah. They are not the first to face such challenges. Go into the ark. Paragraph 15, question. Noah dealt with what losses as he neared his 600th year? Decades passed, and the ark gradually assumed its final shape. As Noah neared his 600th year, he dealt with losses. His father, Lamech, died. The footnote reads, Lamech had given his son the name Noah, probably meaning rest or consolation, and had prophesied that Noah would fulfill the significance of his name by leading mankind to a rest from toiling on cursed ground. Lamech did not live to see his prophecy fulfilled. Noah's mother, brothers, and sisters may have perished in the flood. End of footnote. 5 years later, Lamech's father, Noah's grandfather Methuselah, died at the age of 969, ending the longest human life in the Bible record. Both Methuselah and Lamech had been contemporaries of the first man, Adam. Paragraphs 16 and 17. Question A. Noah received what new message in his 600th year? Part B. Describe the unforgettable sight that Noah and his family witnessed. In his 600th year, the patriarch Noah received a new message from Jehovah God. Go, you and all your household, into the ark. Genesis 7:1-3. At the same time, God told Noah to take all the kinds of animals into the ark, by sevens in the case of the clean ones, fit for sacrificial use, and the rest by twos. It must have been an unforgettable sight. From the horizon they streamed in by the thousands, walking, flying, crawling, waddling, lumbering, all in an astonishing variety of sizes, shapes, and dispositions. We need not imagine poor Noah trying to corral, wrangle, or somehow cajole all those wild animals into entering the confined space of the ark. The account says that they went in to Noah inside the ark. Genesis 7:9. Paragraphs 18 and 19, question A. How might we reason on the questions that skeptics raise regarding the events in Noah's account? Question B. How do we see Jehovah's wisdom in the way that he chose to save his animal creations? Some skeptics might ask, how could such a thing happen? And how could all those animals coexist peacefully in a confined space? Consider, is it really beyond the power of the Creator of the entire universe to control his animal creations, even render them tame and docile if needed? Remember, Jehovah is the God who created the animals. Much later, he also parted the Red Sea and made the sun stand still. Could he not carry out every event described in Noah's account? Of course he could, and he did. Granted, God could have chosen to save his animal creations in some other way. However, he wisely chose a way that reminds us of the trust that he originally placed in humans to take care of all the living things on this earth. Many parents today thus use Noah's story to teach their children that Jehovah values the animals and the people he has created. Paragraph 20. Question. How might Noah and his family have been occupied during the final week before the deluge? Jehovah told Noah that the deluge would come in a week. It must have been a hectic time for the family. Imagine the work of getting all the animals, as well as foodstuffs for the animals and for the family, placed in an orderly fashion and hauling the family's belongings aboard. Noah's wife and the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth may have been especially concerned about making a livable home in that ark. Paragraphs 21 and 22. Question A. Why should we not be surprised at the apathy of the community in Noah's day? Question B. When did the ridicule that Noah and his family received from their neighbors come to an end? What of the community? They still took no note, even in the face of all the evidence that Jehovah was blessing Noah and his endeavors. They could not help but notice the animals streaming into the ark. But we should not be surprised at their apathy. People today likewise take no note of the overwhelming evidence that we are now living in the final days of this world system of things. And as the Apostle Peter foretold, ridiculers have come with their ridicule, mocking those who heed God's warning.
2 Peter 3:3-6 reads, For you know this first, that in the last days there will come ridiculers with their ridicule, proceeding according to their own desires, and saying, Where is this promised presence of his? Why, from the day our forefathers fell asleep in death, all things are continuing exactly as from creation's beginning. For, according to their wish, this fact escapes their notice, that there were heavens from of old, and an earth standing compactly out of water and in the midst of water by the word of God. And by those means the world of that time suffered destruction when it was deluged with water.
Likewise, people surely ridiculed Noah and his family. When did the ridicule end? The account tells us that once Noah had brought his family and the animals inside the ark, Jehovah shut the door behind him. Genesis 7:16-21. If any ridiculers were nearby, that divine action no doubt silenced them. If not, the rain did, for down it came, and it kept coming and coming and coming, flooding the whole world, just as Jehovah had said. Paragraph 23. Question A. How do we know that Jehovah took no delight in the death of the wicked in Noah's day? Question B. Why is it wise to imitate the faith of Noah today? Did Jehovah take delight in the death of those wicked people? No. On the contrary, he had given them ample opportunity to change their ways and do what was right. Could they have done so? Noah's life course answered that question. By walking with Jehovah, obeying his God in all things, Noah showed that survival was possible. In that sense, his faith condemned the world of his day. It cast the wickedness of his generation in a clear light. His faith kept him and his family safe. If you imitate the faith of Noah, you may likewise do yourself and those you love a world of good. Like Noah, you can walk with Jehovah God as your friend, and the friendship can last forever. Questions to think about. Noah and his wife faced what challenges in raising their children? How did Noah show faith in building the ark? Why must preaching have been a difficult assignment in Noah's day? In what ways are you determined to imitate the faith of Noah? Chapter 3. The Father of all those having faith. Paragraphs 1 and 2. Question. How had the world changed since Noah's day, and how was Abram affected? Abram looked up, his gaze drawn to the ziggurat that loomed over his home city of Ur. The footnote reads, "Years later, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of a multitude." End of footnote. There was a clamor up there, and smoke was rising. The priests of the moon god were offering sacrifices again. Picture Abram turning away and shaking his head, a frown creasing his brow. As he made his way homeward through the throngs on the streets, he likely thought about the idolatry that pervaded Ur. How the stain of that corrupt worship had spread in the world since Noah's day. Noah died just 2 years before Abram was born. When Noah and his family emerged from the ark after the great deluge, that patriarch offered up a sacrifice to Jehovah God, who in turn made a rainbow appear. At that time, the only worship in the world was pure worship. But now, as the 10th generation from Noah was spreading abroad in the earth, pure worship was becoming a rarity. People everywhere were worshiping pagan gods. Even Abram's father, Terah, was involved in idolatry, perhaps making idols. Paragraph 3, question. As Abram's life went on, what quality stood out in him, and what can we learn from that? Abram was different. As his life went on, he stood out more and more because of his faith. In fact, the Apostle Paul was later inspired to call him the father of all those having faith.
Romans 4:11 reads, "And he received a sign, namely circumcision, as a seal of the righteousness by the faith he had while in his uncircumcised state, that he might be the father of all those having faith while in uncircumcision, in order for righteousness to be counted to them."
Let us see how Abram began his journey to become such a man. We ourselves can thereby learn much about how to grow in faith. Serving Jehovah in the post-flood world. Paragraphs 4 and 5, question. From whom might Abram have learned about Jehovah, and why may we conclude that this is a possibility? How did Abram come to learn about Jehovah God? We know that Jehovah had faithful servants on earth in those days. Shem was such a man. Though not the eldest of Noah's 3 sons, he is often mentioned first. That was evidently because Shem was a man of outstanding faith. The footnote reads, "Similarly, Abram is often mentioned first among Terah's sons, although he was far from being the eldest." End of footnote. Sometime after the flood, Noah referred to Jehovah as Shem's God. Shem showed respect for Jehovah and for pure worship. Did Abram know Shem? It is possible that he did. Imagine Abram as a boy. How fascinated he would have been to learn that he had a living ancestor whose ancient, wise eyes had witnessed over 4 centuries of human history. Shem had seen the evils of the pre-flood world, the great deluge that cleansed the earth, the founding of the first nations as mankind multiplied in the earth, and the dark days of Nimrod's rebellion at the Tower of Babel. Faithful Shem stayed clear of that rebellion, so when Jehovah confused the language of the tower builders, Shem and his family continued to speak man's original language, the tongue of Noah. That family included Abram. Surely then, Abram grew up with a high regard for Shem. What is more, Shem remained alive through most of Abram's long life. So Abram may have learned about Jehovah from Shem. Paragraph 6, question A. How did Abram show that he had taken to heart the great lesson of the deluge? Question B. What kind of life did Abram and Sarai have together? In any event, Abram took to heart the great lesson of the deluge. he endeavored to walk with God as Noah had walked with him. That is why Abram rejected idolatry and stood out as different in Ur, perhaps even in his immediate family. However, he came to find a wonderful ally in life. He married Sarai, a woman who was exceptional not only for her beauty, but also for her great faith in Jehovah. The footnote reads, "Later, God changed Sarai's name to Sarah, meaning princess." End of footnote. Though childless, that couple no doubt found much joy in serving Jehovah together. They also adopted Abram's orphaned nephew, Lot. Paragraph 7. Question: how do followers of Jesus need to imitate Abram? Abram never left Jehovah for the idolatry of Ur. He and Sarai were willing to stand out as different from that idolatrous community. If we are to develop genuine faith, we need a similar spirit. We too must be willing to be different. Jesus said that his followers would be no part of the world, and that the world would hate them as a result.
John 15:19 reads, "If you were part of the world would be fond of what is its own. Now because you are no part of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, on this account the world hates you."
If you ever feel the pain of rejection by members of your family or your community because of your decision to serve Jehovah, remember that you are not alone. You are in good company, walking with God as did Abram and Sarai before you. Go out from your land. Paragraphs 8 and 9. Question A. Abram had what unforgettable experience? Question B. What was Jehovah's message to Abram? One day, Abram had an unforgettable experience. He received a communication from Jehovah God. The Bible provides little in the way of specifics, but it does say that the God of glory appeared to that faithful man.
Acts 7:2 and 3 reads, "He said, 'Men, brothers and fathers, hear. The God of glory appeared to our forefather Abraham while he was in Mesopotamia, before he took up residence in Haran. And he said to him, Go out from your land and from your relatives, and come on into the land I shall show you.'"
Perhaps by means of an angelic representative, Abram received a glimpse of the overwhelming glory of the Sovereign of the universe. We can only imagine how thrilled Abram was to see the contrast between the living God and the lifeless idols worshipped among his contemporaries. What was Jehovah's message to Abram? Go out from your land and from your relatives, and come on into the land I shall show you. Jehovah did not say which land he had in mind, only that he would show it to Abram. First, though, Abram would have to leave behind his homeland and his relatives. In the cultures of the ancient Middle East, family meant a great deal. For a man to leave his relatives and move far away was often considered a terrible fate, to some worse than death itself. Paragraph 10. Question: why might it have been a sacrifice for Abram and Sarai to leave their home in Ur? Leaving his land involved sacrifice. Ur was evidently a bustling, wealthy city. Excavations have revealed that very comfortable homes existed in ancient Ur. Some had a dozen or more rooms for family and servants, all arranged around a paved inner courtyard. Common amenities included water fountains, lavatories, and waste disposal. Remember, too, that Abram and Sarai were far from young. He was likely in his 70s, she in her 60s. He surely wanted Sarai to be reasonably comfortable and well cared for, what any good husband wants for his wife. Imagine their conversations about this assignment. the questions and concerns that might have arisen in their hearts. Abram must have been so pleased when Sarai rose to this challenge. Like him, she was willing to leave all the comforts of home behind. Paragraphs 11 and 12. Question A. What preparations and decisions needed to be made prior to leaving Ur? Question B. How might we picture the morning of departure? With the decision made, Abram and Sarai had much to do. A great deal of packing and organizing lay ahead of them. What would they take on this journey into the unknown, and what would they leave behind? More important, though, were the people in their lives. What would they do about aged Terah? They decided to take him and care for him along the way. He may have consented heartily, for the account credits him as patriarch with taking his family out of Ur. No doubt he had given up idolatry. Abram's nephew Lot would also accompany the sojourners. Finally, the morning of departure was upon them. Picture the caravan assembling outside the city walls and moat of Ur. The camels and donkeys were laden, the flocks were assembled, the family and servants were settled into their places, and a sense of expectation was in the air. The footnote reads, Some scholars question whether the camel was domesticated in Abram's time. However, the grounds for such objections are weak. The Bible several times mentions camels among Abram's possessions. End of footnote. Perhaps all eyes turned to Abram, waiting for him to give the signal to go. Finally, the moment arrived, and they set off, leaving Ur behind forever. Paragraph 13, question. How do many servants of Jehovah today show a spirit similar to that of Abram and Sarai? Today, many servants of Jehovah decide to move to where there is a need for more kingdom preachers. Others decide to learn a new language in order to expand their ministry. Or they decide to try some form of service that is outside their comfort zone. Such decisions generally require sacrifice, a willingness to forego some measure of material comfort. How commendable that spirit is, and how like the spirit of Abram and Sarai. If we show such faith, we may be assured that Jehovah will always give us far more than we give him. He never fails to reward faith. Did he do so for Abram? Crossing the Euphrates. Paragraphs 14 and 15. Question. What was the journey from Ur to Haran like, and why might Abram have decided to settle in Haran for a time? The caravan gradually settled into the routine of travel. We might imagine Abram and Sarai alternating between riding and walking, their conversation mingling with the tinkling of bells hanging from the animals' harnesses. Gradually, even the less experienced travelers became more adept at making and breaking camp, and helping aged Terah to get comfortably situated atop a camel or a donkey. They made their way northwest, following the great arc of the Euphrates River. Days stretched into weeks, and the landscape slid slowly by. Finally, after some 600 miles on the road, they reached the beehive-shaped huts of Haran, a prosperous city on a crossroads of the east-west trade routes. There the family stopped, and there they settled for a time. Perhaps Terah was too frail to travel any farther. Paragraphs 16 and 17, question A. Abram was thrilled by what covenant? Question B. How did Jehovah bless Abram during his stay in Haran? In time, Terah died at the age of 205. Abram found great comfort during that time of loss, for Jehovah again communicated with him. He repeated the instructions that he had given back in Ur, and he enlarged on his promises. Abram was to become a great nation, and blessings would become available to all the families on earth because of him.
Genesis 12:2 and 3 reads, "And I shall make a great nation out of you, and I shall bless you, and I will make your name great, and prove yourself a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and him that calls down evil upon you I shall curse, and all the families of the ground will certainly bless themselves by means of you."
Thrilled over this covenant between him and God, Abram knew that it was time to move on. This time, though, there was even more to pack, for Jehovah had blessed Abram during his stay in Haran. The account mentions all the goods that they had accumulated and the souls whom they had acquired in Haran. Genesis 12:5. To become a nation, Abram would need material resources and servants, a large household. Jehovah does not always make his servants rich, but he does give them whatever they need in order to accomplish his will. Thus fortified, Abram led his caravan into the unknown. Paragraph 18, question A. When did Abram reach a milestone in the history of God's dealings with his people? Question B. What other important events transpired on Nisan 14 in later years? Several days' journey from Haran lay Carchemish, where caravans commonly crossed the Euphrates. Perhaps it was at this spot that Abram reached a milestone in the history of God's dealings with his people. It was evidently on the 14th day of the month, later named Nisan, in 1943 BCE, that Abram led his caravan across the river. To the south stretched the land that Jehovah had promised to show Abram. On that day, God's covenant with Abram went into effect. Paragraph 19, question. Jehovah's promise to Abram included a mention of what? And of what might that have reminded Abram? Abram moved southward through the land, and the caravan stopped near the big trees of Moreh, near Shechem. There Abram once more received word from Jehovah. God's promise this time mentioned Abram's seed, or progeny, who would take possession of the land. Did Abram think back to the prophecy Jehovah had uttered in Eden, the one mentioning a seed, or offspring, who would one day rescue mankind? Perhaps. He may have begun to see, however dimly, that he was part of a grand purpose that Jehovah had in mind. Paragraph 20, question. How did Abram show appreciation for the privilege that Jehovah bestowed on him? Abram deeply appreciated the privilege that Jehovah bestowed on him. As he moved through the land, no doubt cautiously, since it was still inhabited by the Canaanites, Abram stopped and built altars to Jehovah, first near the big trees of Moreh, then near Bethel. He called on the name of Jehovah, likely expressing his heartfelt thanks to his God as he contemplated the future of his progeny. He may also have preached to his Canaanite neighbors.
Genesis 12:7 and 8 reads, Jehovah now appeared to Abram and said, "To your seed I am going to give this land." After that, he built an altar there to Jehovah, who had appeared to him. Later, he moved from there to the mountainous region to the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. Then he built an altar there to Jehovah, and began to call on the name of Jehovah.
Of course, great challenges to Abram's faith lay ahead on his life's journey. Wisely, Abram was not looking back to the home and comforts he had left behind in Ur. He was looking forward. Hebrews 11:10 says of Abram, "He was awaiting the city having real foundations, the builder and maker of which city is God." Paragraph 21, question. How does our knowledge of God's kingdom compare with that of Abram? And what are you motivated to do? We who serve Jehovah today know a lot more about that figurative city, God's kingdom, than did Abram. We know that the kingdom is reigning in heaven and will soon bring an end to this world system. And we know that Abram's long-promised seed, Jesus Christ, now rules that kingdom. What a privilege it will be for us to see the time when Abraham lives again and at last grasps the divine purpose that he could formerly see only in hazy outline. Would you like to see Jehovah fulfill his every promise? By all means, then, continue to do what Abram did. Show a spirit of self-sacrifice, obedience, and prayerful appreciation for the privileges Jehovah extends to you. As you imitate Abram's faith, the father of all those having faith will, in a sense, become your father too. The city that Abram and Sarai left behind. Jehovah's organization has long worked hard to bring color and life to discussions of Bible characters and their background. For example, this description of the city that Abram and Sarai left behind appeared in the May 22, 1988 issue of Awake magazine. Halfway between the Persian Gulf and the city of Baghdad, there is an unsightly pile of mud bricks. It is but a lonely sentinel keeping watch over a vast stretch of sterile desert. Pummeled by dust storms and baked by a hostile sun, the brooding ruins sit in austere silence that is broken only by the occasional howl of a nocturnal creature. This is all that remains of the once mighty city of Ur. But go back 4 millenniums. There, on what was then the eastern bank of the Euphrates River, Ur is a thriving city. Gleaming whitewashed houses and shops line its winding streets. Merchants and patrons haggle over prices in the bazaars. Workers labor day and night, spinning milk-white thread from billowy bundles of wool. Slaves tramp down creaking ships' ramps, bowing under the weight of imported treasures. All this bustle takes place in the shadow of a towering ziggurat that dominates the city's landscape. Worshippers come to this sanctuary to render homage to a deity they believe has brought prosperity to Ur, the moon god Nana, or Sin. To one man, though, the odor of sacrifices offered atop this massive pyramid is an unholy stench. His name is Abram. A vital date in Bible history. The date on which Abram crossed the Euphrates River is important in Bible chronology. Other key events transpired on that date in later years. Exactly 430 years later, on Nisan 14, 1513 BCE, Jehovah freed Israel from bondage to Egypt so that they could go and claim the land that God had promised to Abram. And on that same date in 33 CE, Jesus gathered his apostles together and established with them a covenant that made them part of a government in heaven that will soon solve all mankind's ills. To this day, Jehovah's Witnesses gather each year to commemorate the Lord's evening meal on the same date of the Jewish calendar, Nisan 14. Questions to think about. How did Abram show faith when it came to idolatry? What impresses you about Abram's willingness to leave Ur? Abram's faith brought him what blessings and privileges? In what ways would you like to imitate the faith of Abram? Chapter 4. Where you go, I shall go. Paragraphs 1 and 2, Part A, describe the journey of Ruth and Naomi and the burden of grief they carried. Question B, how did Ruth's journey differ from that of Naomi? Ruth walked beside Naomi on a road that stretched across the high, wind-swept plains of Moab. They were alone now, two tiny figures in a vast landscape. Imagine Ruth noticing that the afternoon shadows had lengthened, then looking at her mother-in-law and wondering if it was time to find a place to rest for the night. She loved Naomi dearly and would do all she could to care for her. Each woman bore a heavy burden of grief. Naomi had been a widow for years now, but she was mourning more recent losses, the deaths of her two sons, Kilian and Mahlon. Ruth, too, was grieving. Mahlon was her husband. She and Naomi were heading to the same destination, the town of Bethlehem in Israel. In a way, though, their journeys differed. Naomi was going home. Ruth was venturing into the unknown, leaving her own kin, her homeland, and all its customs, including its gods, behind her.
Ruth 1, 3-6 reads, In time Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, so that she remained with her two sons. Later the men took wives for themselves, Moabite women. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they went on dwelling there for about 10 years. In time the two of them, Mahlon and Kilian, also died, so that the woman remained without her two children and her husband. And she proceeded to get up with her daughters-in-law and to return from the fields of Moab. For she had heard in the field of Moab that Jehovah had turned his attention to his people by giving them bread.
Paragraph 3, question. The answers to what questions will help us to imitate the faith of Ruth? What would move a young woman to make such a drastic change? How would Ruth find the strength to make a new life for herself and to take care of Naomi? In learning the answers, we will find much to imitate in the faith of Ruth the Moabitess. First, let us consider how those two women came to be on that long road to Bethlehem. A family torn apart by tragedy. Paragraphs 4 and 5, question A. Why did Naomi's family move to Moab? Question B. What challenges did Naomi face in Moab? Ruth grew up in Moab, a small country that lay to the east of the Dead Sea. The region consisted mostly of high, sparsely wooded tablelands cut through by deep ravines. The fields of Moab often proved to be fertile farmland, even when famine stalked Israel. That, in fact, was why Ruth first came into contact with Mahlon and his family. A famine in Israel had convinced Naomi's husband Elimelech that he must move his wife and two sons away from their homeland and take up living in Moab as aliens. The move must have presented challenges to the faith of each family member, for Israelites needed to worship regularly at the sacred place Jehovah had designated. Naomi managed to keep her faith alive. Still, she was grief-stricken when her husband died. Paragraphs 6 and 7, question A. Why might Naomi have been concerned when her sons married Moabite women? Question B. Why was Naomi's treatment of her daughters-in-law commendable? Naomi might well have suffered again later when her sons married Moabite women. She knew that her nation's forefather Abraham went to great lengths to procure a wife for his son Isaac from among his own people who worshipped Jehovah. Later, the Mosaic Law warned the Israelites not to let their sons and daughters marry foreigners, for fear that God's people would be led into idolatry. Nevertheless, Mahlon and Kilian married Moabite women. If Naomi was concerned or disappointed, she evidently made sure that she showed her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, genuine kindness and love. Perhaps she hoped that they too would someday come to worship Jehovah as she did. At any rate, both Ruth and Orpah were fond of Naomi. That good relationship helped them when tragedy struck. Before either of the young women had borne children, both became widows. Paragraph 8. Question: what may have drawn Ruth to Jehovah? Did Ruth's religious background prepare her for such a tragedy? It is hard to see how it could have. The Moabites worshipped many gods, the chief among them being Chemosh. It seems that the Moabite religion was not exempt from the brutality and horrors common in those times, including the sacrifice of children. Anything Ruth learned from Mahlon or Naomi about the loving and merciful God of Israel, Jehovah, surely struck her as a marked contrast. Jehovah ruled through love, not terror.
Deuteronomy 6:5 reads, "And you must love Jehovah your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your vital force."
In the wake of her devastating loss, Ruth may have drawn even closer to Naomi and listened willingly to the older woman as she spoke about the Almighty God, Jehovah, His wonderful works, and the loving, merciful way He dealt with His people. Paragraphs 9 through 11. Question A. What decision did Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah make? Question B. What can we learn from the tragedies that befell Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah? Naomi, for her part, was eager for news of her homeland. One day she heard, perhaps from a traveling merchant, that the famine in Israel was over. Jehovah had turned His attention to His people. Bethlehem was again living up to its name, which means house of bread. Naomi decided to return home. What would Ruth and Orpah do? They had grown close to Naomi through their shared ordeal. Ruth, in particular, it seems, was drawn to Naomi's kindness and her steadfast faith in Jehovah. The three widows set off for Judah together. The account of Ruth reminds us that tragedy and loss beset good, honest people as well as bad. It shows us, too, that in the face of unbearable loss, we are wise to seek comfort and solace in others, especially those who seek refuge in Jehovah, the God whom Naomi worshipped. The loyal love of Ruth. Paragraphs 12 and 13. Question: why did Naomi want Ruth and Orpah to go back to their homes instead of accompanying her? And how did the two young women react at first? As the miles stretched out behind the three widows, another concern began weighing on Naomi. She thought of the two young women at her side and of the love they had shown to her and her sons. She could not bear the thought of adding to their burdens now. If they left their homeland and came with her, what could she do for them in Bethlehem? Finally, Naomi spoke up. "Go, return each one to the house of her mother. May Jehovah exercise loving kindness toward you, just as you have exercised it toward the men now dead and toward me." She also expressed a hope that Jehovah would reward them with new husbands and new lives. Then she kissed them, the account says, and they began to raise their voices and weep. It is not hard to see why Ruth and Orpah felt so attached to this kind-hearted and unselfish woman. Both of them kept insisting, "No, but with you we shall return to your people." Ruth 1, 8 through 10. Paragraphs 14 and 15. Question A. To what did Orpah return? Question B. How did Naomi try to persuade Ruth to leave her? Naomi was not so easily persuaded, though. She reasoned forcefully that there was little that she could do for them in Israel, since she had no husband to provide for her no sons for them to marry, and no prospects of either. She revealed that her inability to care for them was a source of real bitterness to her. With Orpah, Naomi's words hit home. She had family there in Moab, a mother, and a home that was waiting for her. It really did seem more practical to remain in Moab. So, with a heavy heart, she kissed Naomi goodbye and turned away. What about Ruth? Naomi's arguments applied to her as well, yet we read, "As for Ruth, she stuck with her." Perhaps Naomi had resumed walking on the road when she noticed that Ruth was trailing behind her. She remonstrated, "Look, your widowed sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Return with your widowed sister-in-law." Ruth 1:15. Naomi's words reveal a vital detail to the reader. Orpah had returned not only to her people, but also to her gods. She was content to remain a worshiper of Chemosh and other false gods. Was that how Ruth felt? Paragraphs 16 through 18. Question A. How did Ruth demonstrate loyal love? Question B. What can we learn from Ruth about loyal love? As she faced Naomi on that lonely road, Ruth's heart was sure and clear. It swelled with love for Naomi and for the God whom Naomi served. So Ruth spoke, "Do not plead with me to abandon you, to turn back from accompanying you. For where you go, I shall go, and where you spend the night, I shall spend the night. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I shall die, and there is where I shall be buried. May Jehovah do so to me and add to it, if anything but death should make a separation between me and you." Ruth 1:16 and 17. Ruth's words are remarkable, so much so that they have long outlived her, echoing down through some 30 centuries. They perfectly reveal a precious quality, loyal love. The love that Ruth felt was so strong and so loyal that she would stick with Naomi wherever she went. Only death could separate them. Naomi's people would become her own people, for Ruth was ready to leave behind everything she knew in Moab, even the Moabite gods. Unlike Orpah, Ruth could wholeheartedly say that she wanted Naomi's God, Jehovah, to be her own God as well. The footnote reads, "It is noteworthy that Ruth did not use only the impersonal title God as many foreigners might. She also used God's personal name, Jehovah." The Interpreter's Bible comments, "The writer thus emphasizes that this foreigner is a follower of the true God." End of footnote. So they traveled on, just the two of them now, on the long road to Bethlehem. By one estimate, the journey might have taken as long as a week. Surely, though, each found in the company of the other some measure of comfort in the face of grief. Paragraph 19. Question. How do you think we can imitate Ruth's loyal love in our family, among our friends, and in the congregation? There is no shortage of grief in this world. In our own times, which the Bible calls critical times, hard to deal with, we face all manner of losses as well as grief. 2 Timothy 3:1. The quality we find in Ruth has thus become more important than ever. Loyal love, the kind of love that holds on to its object and simply refuses to let go, is a powerful force for good in this darkening world. We need it in marriage. We need it in family relations. We need it in friendships. We need it in the Christian congregation.
1 John 4:7 and 8 reads, "Beloved ones, let us continue loving one another, because love is from God, And everyone who loves has been born from God and gains the knowledge of God. He that does not love has not come to know God, because God is love. Verse 20 reads, If anyone makes the statement, I love God, and yet is hating his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot be loving God, whom he has not seen.
As we cultivate that kind of love, we are imitating the outstanding example of Ruth. Ruth and Naomi in Bethlehem. Paragraphs 20 through 22, Question A. How had Naomi's life in Moab affected her? Question B. Naomi held what mistaken view of her hardships? It is, of course, one thing to put loyal love into words. It is quite another to prove the quality in action. Ruth had before her the opportunity to show her loyal love not only to Naomi, but also to the God whom she chose as her own, Jehovah. The two women finally reached Bethlehem, a village about 6 miles south of Jerusalem. Naomi and her family, it seems, had once been quite prominent in that little town, for the whole place was buzzing with the news of Naomi's return. The women there would peer at her and say, Is this Naomi? Ruth 1:19. Evidently, her sojourn in Moab had left her much changed. Her countenance and bearing showed the mark of years of hardship and grief. To those kinswomen and neighbors of years past, Naomi revealed how bitter her life had become to her. She even felt that her name should be changed from Naomi, which means my pleasantness, to Mara, which means bitter. Poor Naomi. Much like Job before her, she believed that Jehovah God had brought her hardships on her. Paragraph 23, Question. What did Ruth begin to think about? And what provision did the Mosaic Law make for the poor? As the two women settled into life in Bethlehem, Ruth began thinking about how best to take care of herself and Naomi. She learned that the law that Jehovah had given to his people in Israel included a loving provision for the poor. They were allowed to go into the fields at harvest time and follow the reapers, gleaning what was left behind as well as what grew at the edges and corners of the fields. The footnote reads, It was a remarkable law, surely unlike anything Ruth knew in her homeland. In the ancient Near East in those days, widows were treated badly. Notes one reference work, After her husband's death, normally a widow had to rely on her sons for support. If she had none, she might have to sell herself into slavery, resort to prostitution, or die. End of footnote. Paragraphs 24 and 25. Question. What did Ruth do when she chanced upon the fields of Boaz? And what was the gleaning work like? It was the time of the barley harvest, likely in April by our modern calendar, and Ruth went to the fields to see who would let her work under the provision for gleaners. She chanced upon the fields of a man named Boaz, a wealthy landowner and a relative of Naomi's dead husband Elimelech. Though the law gave her the right to glean, she did not take it for granted. She asked the young man in charge of the harvesters for permission to work. He granted it, and then Ruth got right to work. Imagine Ruth following the harvesters. As they cut through the barley with their flint sickles, she stooped to pick up what they dropped or left behind, bundled the stalks into sheaves, and carried them off to a spot where she could beat out the grain later. It was slow, tiring work, and it got harder as the morning wore on. Yet Ruth kept at it, stopping only to wipe the sweat from her brow and to eat a simple lunch in the house, likely a shelter set up to provide shade for the workers. Paragraphs 26 and 27. Question. What kind of a person was Boaz, and how did he treat Ruth? Ruth probably neither hoped nor expected to be noticed, but she was. Boaz saw her and asked the young foreman who she was. A remarkable man of faith, Boaz greeted his workers, some of whom may have been day laborers or even foreigners, with the words, "Jehovah be with you." Ruth 2:4-7. And they responded in kind. This spiritually minded older man took a fatherly interest in Ruth. Calling her "my daughter," Boaz advised Ruth to keep coming to his fields to glean and to stay near the young women of his household to avoid being harassed by any of the workmen. He made sure that she had food to eat at lunchtime.
Ruth 2:8-9 reads, Later Boaz said to Ruth, "You have heard, have you not, my daughter? Do not go away to glean in another field, and you must also not cross over from this place, and in that way you should keep close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they will harvest, and you must go with them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? When you are thirsty, you must also go to the vessels and drink from what the young men will draw." Verse 14 reads, And Boaz proceeded to say to her at mealtime, "Approach here, and you must eat some of the bread and dip your piece in the vinegar." So she sat down beside the harvesters, and he would hold out roasted grain to her, and she would eat, so that she was satisfied and yet had something left over.
Above all, though, he sought to commend and encourage her. How so? Paragraphs 28 and 29. Question A. What kind of reputation did Ruth have? Question B. How can you, like Ruth, take refuge in Jehovah? When Ruth asked Boaz what she, a foreigner, had done to deserve his kind favor, he replied that he had heard about all that she had done for her mother-in-law, Naomi. Likely Naomi had praised her beloved Ruth among the women of Bethlehem, and word had reached Boaz. He knew, too, that Ruth had turned to the worship of Jehovah, for he said, "May Jehovah reward the way you act, and may there come to be a perfect wage for you from Jehovah the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." Ruth 2:12. How those words must have encouraged Ruth. She had indeed decided to take refuge under the wings of Jehovah God, like a young bird securely nestled against a protective parent. She thanked Boaz for speaking to her so reassuringly, and she kept on working until evening fell. Paragraphs 30 and 31. Question: What can we learn from Ruth about work habits, appreciation, and loyal love? Ruth's faith in action is an excellent example for all of us today who struggle in these difficult economic times. She did not think that others owed her anything, so she appreciated everything that was offered her. She felt no shame in working long and hard to care for one she loved, even though it was humble work. She gratefully accepted and applied wise advice about how to work safely and in good company. Most important, she never lost sight of where her true refuge lay, with her protective Father, Jehovah God. If we show loyal love as Ruth did and follow her example in humility, industriousness, and appreciation, we will find that our faith, too, will become a helpful example for others. How, though, did Jehovah provide for Ruth and Naomi? We will discuss the matter in the following chapter. A masterpiece in miniature. The book of Ruth has been described as a small gem, a masterpiece in miniature. Granted, the book has neither the sweep nor the scope of the book of Judges, which precedes it, and provides the time setting for Ruth. Both books were evidently written by the prophet Samuel. Yet, as you read through the Bible, you may agree that the book of Ruth is beautifully placed in the Bible canon. After reading of the wars, raids, and counter-raids recorded in the book of Judges, you come to this little book that reminds us that Jehovah never loses sight of peaceable people struggling with everyday problems. This simple domestic drama offers profound lessons about love, loss, faith, and loyalty that can benefit us all. Questions to think about. How did Ruth express her faith in Jehovah God? How did Ruth show loyal love? Why did Jehovah value Ruth? In what ways would you like to imitate the faith of Ruth? Chapter 5. An excellent woman. Paragraphs 1 and 2. Question A. What kind of work was Ruth doing? Question B. Ruth learned of what positive aspects of God's law and His people? Ruth knelt by the pile of barley stalks she had gathered during the day. Evening was descending on the fields around Bethlehem, and many workers were already wending their way up to the gate of the little city perched atop a nearby ridge. Ruth's muscles surely protested the long day's labor, for she had been working steadily since the morning. Still she kept at it, swinging a small rod or flail down onto the stalks to loosen the grains. All in all, it had been a good day, better than she could ever have hoped for. Were things finally starting to look up for this young widow? As we saw in the preceding chapter, she had attached herself to her mother-in-law, Naomi, vowing to stick with her and to make Naomi's God, Jehovah, her own God. Together, the two bereaved women had come to Bethlehem from Moab, and Ruth the Moabitess soon learned that Jehovah's law made practical, dignified provisions for the poor in Israel, including foreigners. And now she found that some of Jehovah's people, who lived under the law and were trained by it, showed a degree of spirituality and kindness that touched her wounded heart. Paragraphs 3 and 4. Question A. How had Boaz encouraged Ruth? Question B. How can Ruth's example help us in today's hard economic times? One such person was Boaz, the wealthy older man in whose fields she was gleaning. He had taken fatherly notice of her today. She could not help but smile inwardly when she thought of his kind words, praising her for caring for Naomi and for choosing to seek refuge under the wings of the true God, Jehovah.
Ruth 2:11-14 reads, Then Boaz answered and said to her, The report was fully made to me of all that you have done to your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, and how you proceeded to leave your father and your mother and the land of your relatives, and to go to a people whom you had not known formerly. May Jehovah reward the way you act, and may there come to be a perfect wage for you from Jehovah the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. To this she said, Let me find favor in your eyes, my lord, because you have comforted me, and because you have spoken reassuringly to your maidservant, although I myself may not happen to be like one of your maidservants. And Boaz proceeded to say to her at mealtime, Approach here, and you must eat some of the bread and dip your piece in the vinegar. So she sat down beside the harvesters, and he would hold out roasted grain to her, and she would eat, so that she was satisfied and yet had something left over.
Still, Ruth may have wondered about the life ahead of her. As an impoverished foreigner with neither husband nor child, how would she support herself and Naomi in the years ahead? Would gleaning suffice? And who would take care of her when she grew old? It would be understandable if such concerns weighed on her mind. In today's hard economic times, many struggle with similar anxieties. As we learn how Ruth's faith helped her through such challenges, we will find much to imitate. What makes a family? Paragraphs 5 and 6, Question A. How successful was Ruth's first day of gleaning in the field of Boaz? Question B. How did Naomi react when she saw Ruth? By the time Ruth finished beating out the grain and collecting it all together, she found that she had gleaned about an ephah measure, or 20 dry quarts of barley. Her load may have weighed some 30 pounds. She hoisted it, perhaps bundling it in a cloth and carrying it on her head, and then made her way to Bethlehem in the gathering darkness. Naomi was pleased to see her beloved daughter-in-law, and perhaps she gasped in surprise as she saw Ruth's heavy load of barley. Ruth also brought some food left over from the meal that Boaz had provided for the workers, and the two thus shared a simple meal. Naomi asked, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? May the one who took notice of you become blessed." Ruth 2:19. Naomi was attentive. She saw proof in Ruth's heavy load of provisions that someone had taken notice of the young widow and had treated her kindly. Paragraphs 7 and 8. Question A. Naomi saw the kindness of Boaz as coming from whom and why? Question B. How did Ruth further show her loyal love toward her mother-in-law? The two fell to conversing, and Ruth told Naomi about the kindness of Boaz. Moved, Naomi replied, "Blessed be he of Jehovah, who has not left off his loving kindness toward the living and the dead." Ruth 2:20. She saw the kindness of Boaz as coming from Jehovah, who moves his servants to be generous and promises to reward his people for the kindness they show. The footnote reads, As Naomi noted, Jehovah's kindness is not restricted to the living. It even extends to the dead. Naomi had lost her husband and both sons. Ruth had lost her husband. Surely all three men had meant a great deal to both women. Any kindness shown to Naomi and Ruth was, in effect, kindness to the men who would have wanted those dear women to be cared for. End of footnote.
Proverbs 19:17 reads, "He that is showing favor to the lowly one is lending to Jehovah, and his treatment he will repay to him."
Naomi urged Ruth to accept Boaz's offer to keep gleaning in his fields and to stay near the young women of his own household so that she would escape harassment from the reapers. Ruth took that advice. She also kept on dwelling with her mother-in-law. Ruth 2:22 and 23. In those words we see once more her hallmark quality, loyal love. Ruth's example may move us to ask ourselves whether we honor the bonds of family, loyally supporting our loved ones and offering them help as needed. Jehovah never fails to notice such loyal love. Paragraph 9, question: What can we learn from Ruth and Naomi about family? Were Ruth and Naomi somehow less than a family? Some assume that there must be someone to fill each role: husband, wife, son, daughter, grandparent, and so forth, for a family to be real. But the examples of Ruth and Naomi remind us that servants of Jehovah can open their hearts and make even the smallest of families glow with warmth, kindness, and love. Do you appreciate what family you have? Jesus reminded his followers that the Christian congregation can provide family even for those who have none. He is one of our repurchasers. Paragraph 10, question: In what way did Naomi want to help Ruth? From the barley harvest in April until the wheat harvest in June, Ruth kept gleaning in the fields of Boaz. As the weeks passed, Naomi no doubt thought more about what she could do for her beloved daughter-in-law. Back in Moab, Naomi had been convinced that she could never help Ruth find another husband. Now, though, she was beginning to think differently. She approached Ruth and said, "My daughter, ought I not to look for a resting place for you?" Ruth 3:1. It was customary in those days for parents to find mates for their children, and Ruth had become a true daughter to Naomi. She wanted to find Ruth a resting place, referring to the security and protection that a home and a husband might provide. But what could Naomi do? Paragraphs 11 and 12, question A. When Naomi called Boaz a repurchaser, to what loving provision of God's law was she referring? Question B. How did Ruth respond to her mother-in-law's advice? When Ruth first mentioned Boaz, Naomi said, "The man is related to us. He is one of our repurchasers." Ruth 2:20. What did that mean? God's law to Israel included loving provisions for families who, as a result of poverty or bereavement, fell on hard times. If a woman was widowed while still childless, she was especially devastated because her husband's name, his posterity, would be cut off, lost to future generations. However, God's law allowed the man's brother to marry the widow so that she could give birth to an heir who might carry on her deceased husband's name and care for the family property. The footnote reads, "The right to marry such a widow was evidently extended first to the deceased man's brothers and then to the nearest male relatives, as was the right to inheritance." End of footnote. Naomi related to Ruth a plan of action. We might imagine the young woman's eyes widening as her mother-in-law spoke. Israel's law was still new to Ruth, and many of its customs were still quite foreign to her. Even so, she held Naomi in such high regard that she listened carefully to every word. What Naomi advised her to do might have seemed awkward or embarrassing, even potentially humiliating. Yet Ruth agreed. She meekly said, "All that you say to me I shall do." Ruth 3:5. Paragraph 13. Question. What lesson can we learn from Ruth about accepting advice from older ones? Sometimes it is difficult for young people to listen to the advice of those who are older and more experienced. It is easy to assume that older ones do not really understand the challenges and problems the young face. Ruth's humble example reminds us that listening to the wisdom of older ones who love us and have our best interests at heart can be very rewarding.
Psalm 71:17 and 18 reads, "O God, you have taught me from my youth on, and until now I keep telling about your wonderful works. And even until old age and gray-headedness, O God, do not leave me, until I may tell about your arm to the generation, to all those who are to come, about your mightiness."
But what was Naomi's advice? And was Ruth really rewarded for heeding it? Ruth at the threshing floor. Paragraph 14. Question. What was a threshing floor, and how was it used? That evening, Ruth made her way to the threshing floor, a flat, hard-packed area where a number of farmers would take their grain for threshing and winnowing. The spot chosen was usually on a hillside or hilltop where the breezes were strong in the late afternoon and early evening. To release the grain from the chaff and straw, workers used big forks or shovels to toss the mixture into the wind, which carried off the lighter chaff and allowed the heavier grains to fall back to the floor. Paragraphs 15 and 16, Part A, describe the scene at the threshing floor as Boaz finished working for the evening. Question B, how did Boaz discover that Ruth was lying at his feet? Ruth watched discreetly as the work wound down in the evening. Boaz oversaw the winnowing of his grain, which grew into a great heap. After eating heartily, he lay down at one end of the heap. This was evidently a common practice, perhaps designed to protect the precious harvest from thieves and marauders. Ruth saw Boaz settling down for the night. The time had come to put Naomi's plan into action. Ruth crept closer, her heart racing. She could tell that the man was sound asleep, so just as Naomi had said, she went over to his feet, uncovered them, and lay down by them. Then she waited. The time passed. To Ruth, it must have felt like an eternity. Finally, around midnight, Boaz began to stir. Trembling from the cold, he stretched forward, likely to cover his feet up again. But he sensed that someone was there. As the account reads, "Look, a woman lying at his feet." Ruth 3:8. Paragraph 17. Question. Those who imply that there was something improper in Ruth's actions ignore what two simple facts? "Who are you?" he asked. Ruth replied, perhaps with a tremor in her voice, "I am Ruth, your slave girl, and you must spread out your skirt over your slave girl, for you are a repurchaser." Ruth 3:9. Some modern interpreters have sought to imply that there were some sexual undertones in Ruth's actions and words, but they ignore two simple facts. First, Ruth was acting according to the customs of the day, many of which are long lost to us. So it would be a mistake to view her actions through the warped lens of today's debased moral standards. Second, Boaz responded in a way that clearly shows that he saw Ruth's conduct as morally chaste and highly commendable. Paragraph 18. Question. What did Boaz say to comfort Ruth? And to what two instances of her loving kindness did he refer? Boaz spoke, and no doubt his gentle, soothing tone comforted Ruth. He said, "Blessed may you be of Jehovah, my daughter. You have expressed your loving kindness better in the last instance than in the first instance, in not going after the young fellows, whether lowly or rich." Ruth 3:10. The first instance referred to Ruth's loyal love in accompanying Naomi back to Israel and caring for her. The last instance was the present one. Boaz noted that a young woman like Ruth might easily have sought a husband among much younger men, whether rich or poor. Rather, she wanted to do good not only to Naomi, but also to Naomi's deceased husband, to carry on the dead man's name in his homeland. It is not hard to see why Boaz was moved by this young woman's unselfishness. Paragraphs 19 and 20. Question A. Why did Boaz not marry Ruth right away? Question B. In what ways did Boaz show kindness and sensitivity toward Ruth and her reputation? Boaz continued, "And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. All that you say I shall do for you, for everyone in the gate of my people is aware that you are an excellent woman." Ruth 3:11. He was pleased at the prospect of marrying Ruth. Perhaps he was not completely surprised to be asked to be her repurchaser. However, Boaz was a righteous man, and he was not about to act merely on his own preferences. He told Ruth that there was another repurchaser, one more closely related to the family of Naomi's dead husband. Boaz would approach that man first and give him the opportunity to become Ruth's husband. Boaz urged Ruth to lie down again and rest until morning was near. Then she could slip away unnoticed. He wanted to protect her reputation as well as his own, since people might wrongly assume that something immoral had taken place. Ruth lay near the man's feet again, perhaps with a mind more at ease after he had responded to her petition so kindly. Then, while it was still dark, she rose. Boaz filled her cloak with a generous gift of barley, and she made her way back into Bethlehem.
Ruth 3:13-15 reads, "Lodge here tonight, and it must occur in the morning that if he will repurchase you, fine. Let him do the repurchasing. But if he does not take delight in repurchasing you, I will then repurchase you, I myself, as sure as Jehovah lives. Keep lying down until the morning." And she kept lying at his feet until the morning, and then got up before anyone could recognize another. He now said, "Do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." And he went on to say, "Bring the cloak that is on you, and hold it open." So she held it open, and he proceeded to measure out 6 measures of barley and to place it upon her, after which he went into the city.
Paragraph 21. Question: What contributed to Ruth's being known as an excellent woman, and how can we imitate her example? How satisfying it must have been for Ruth to contemplate what Boaz had said, that she was known among all the people as an excellent woman. No doubt her eagerness to get to know Jehovah and to serve him had much to do with that reputation. She had also shown great kindness and sensitivity toward Naomi and her people, willingly adapting to ways and customs that were surely unfamiliar to her. If we imitate Ruth's faith, we will seek to treat others and their ways and customs with deep respect. If we do, we too may find that we develop a reputation for excellence. A resting place for Ruth. Paragraphs 22 and 23. Question A. What may have been the meaning behind the gift that Boaz bestowed on Ruth? Question B. What did Naomi urge Ruth to do? "Who are you, my daughter?" Naomi said when Ruth arrived home. Perhaps it was the darkness that prompted the question, but Naomi also wanted to know whether Ruth was still the same unattached widow or one with prospects of marriage before her. Ruth quickly told her mother-in-law of all that had passed between her and Boaz. She also presented the generous gift of barley that Boaz had told her to give to Naomi. The footnote reads, Boaz gave Ruth 6 measures of unspecified weight, perhaps to suggest that just as 6 workdays were followed by a Sabbath rest, Ruth's own days of toil as a widow were soon to be followed by the rest that a secure home and a husband could provide. On the other hand, the 6 measures, perhaps shovelfuls, may simply have been all that Ruth could carry. End of footnote. Wisely, Naomi urged Ruth to sit at home quietly that day instead of going out to glean in the fields. She assured Ruth, "The man will have no rest unless he has brought the matter to an end today." Ruth 3:18. Paragraphs 24 and 25. Question A. How did Boaz show that he was an upright and unselfish man? Question B. In what ways was Ruth blessed? Naomi was quite right about Boaz. He went to the city gate, where the city elders usually met, and waited until the man who was a closer relative passed by. In front of witnesses, Boaz offered the man the opportunity to act as repurchaser by marrying Ruth. However, the man refused, claiming that doing so would ruin his own inheritance. Then, before the witnesses there at the city gate, Boaz stated that he would act as the repurchaser. buying up the estate of Naomi's dead husband Elimelech and marrying Ruth, the widow of Elimelech's son Mahlon. Boaz declared his hope that doing so would cause the name of the dead man to rise upon his inheritance. Ruth 4, 1-10. Boaz truly was an upright and unselfish man. Boaz married Ruth. Thereafter we read, Jehovah granted her conception, and she bore a son. Ruth 4, 11-22. The women of Bethlehem blessed Naomi and praised Ruth for being better to Naomi than 7 sons would have been. Later, we learn Ruth's son became an ancestor of the great King David. David, in turn, was an ancestor of Jesus Christ. The footnote reads, Ruth is one of 5 women whom the Bible lists in the ancestry of Jesus. Another one is Rahab, who was the mother of Boaz. Like Ruth, she was not an Israelite. End of footnote. Paragraph 26. Question: of what do the examples of Ruth and Naomi remind us? Ruth was blessed indeed, as was Naomi, who helped to raise the child as if he were her own. The lives of these 2 women stand as vivid reminders that Jehovah God notices all those who toil humbly to provide for their own and who serve Him loyally with His chosen people. He never fails to reward faithful people such as Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth. Questions to think about. How did Ruth show loyal love toward Naomi? How did Naomi show loyal love toward Ruth? Why does Jehovah treasure such servants as Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth? How do you hope to imitate the faith of Ruth?